Hello chess fans and friends. What you are about to witness is Magnus Carlsen getting a taste of his own medicine, finding himself on the receiving end of a brilliant and brutal sacrificial attack launched by the world's number 8, Wesley So, in this recent Armageddon game from the Champions Chess Tour Finals. We so often see Magnus dish out this kind of thing, but can he take it himself? Can he defend like a computer and survive the onslaught? Well, the only way you are going to find out is to watch my entire coverage of this unbelievable game, which begins right now. Wesley So with the white pieces begins the game with e4, and for Magnus Carlsen we have c5, Sicilian defense. Knight to c3 from So, which is not nearly as popular as knight to f3 in this position because it gives Carlsen the chance to play knight to c6, supporting a pawn moving to e5, which is what he plays after knight to f3, locking down the d4 square. White is not going to get in his thematic d4 anytime soon, but that's okay. Black has created a big hole on d5, which Wesley So goes about targeting right away with this move bishop c4. We have g6 from Carlsen, preparing to fianchetto. Now d3 from So, opening up the diagonal for the bishop, which would support a knight moving to g5 to target f7 with the help of this bishop here. So Carlsen decides to prevent that from happening with h6, watching over the g5 square. Now h3 from So, a little strange, seems a little premature. Normally you play this move to prevent bishop g4, but that move is not even possible yet. So what is So thinking here? Well, you're going to find out in a minute. Carlsen plays d6, and now we have knight to h2. Looks pretty weird, but it's actually a top engine move. I think maybe we might be seeing some preparation by So. Bishop to g7 from Carlsen, castles, and now knight to f6. And now we see the point to knight to h2, f4. Okay, a pawn thrust. Carlsen takes out the pawn with e takes f4, and a bishop recaptures. Okay, we have castles, queen to d2, development, hitting h6, so that's defended with the move king to h7. And now the knight goes back to f3. Here we have bishop to e6, very natural looking, and this sets the stage for an incredible move by Wesley So, which I really don't know if Magnus saw coming at all. Knight to g5 check. This must have been shocking for the former world champion and the current #1 player in the world, who is usually the one to be making these kinds of moves. But now that he's on the receiving end, can he handle it? Will he crumble? Is this psychologically just too much for him to handle? This move is not a favorite move of the engine, but it may be practically the strongest move in the position. These kinds of moves can be very difficult to deal with psychologically when you don't see them coming. But Carlsen does pretty well. First of all, he realizes immediately that the knight has to be taken out. The king's in check. If you were to move the king, well, you're just going to lose pawns. Knight takes e6. After the pawn captures on e6, white has his choice. You could take on h6, you could take on e6. This is no good. So he says, I will take the knight. Now it's up to you to see if you can get that piece back. Bishop takes g5, of course, and now we can see the point of the knight sacrifice. This knight is pinned. It can't go anywhere, and white is just going to build up the pressure on that knight and try to win the piece back. But Carlsen finds a defense here. Knight to e5. He's going to reroute to d7 and add more protection. After queen to f2, knight e to d7. The knight is attacked by 3 pieces. It's defended by 3. Is white just busted here? Is So lost? No, he has foreseen that he can add more pressure. He can't put a knight here because the bishop will take it out, but he can play e5. And that pawn has to be taken. The knight is pinned. It's taken with d takes e5. And now this has cleared the way for knight to e4. Now we got 4 pieces attacking that knight. What are you going to do? How can you add more defense to that knight? You can't. Carlsen realizes this, so he plays a natural looking move. He just breaks the pin, hits this pawn on b2, but this wasn't the best move. Bishop to f5 is what the engine likes. It's blocking the queen and rook's access to the knight. Now there is queen to h4 check. The king moves, and then the engine's giving rook takes f5, g takes f5, and then knight g3. This is actually still in black's favor according to the engine, but not as much as you might think. White is a whole rook down here, but the engine thinks it's less than a pawn down. Quite a scary and convoluted position for black to have to deal with. A lot of white pieces coming in towards his king there. I don't know if Carlsen even considered this, but the move he made was queen to b6. And what do you think Wesley So does? Do you think he takes on f6? No, he doesn't. He plays queen to h4 check. A very nice move, very tricky move, because if you just get your king out of danger, which is what maybe a lot of us would play, there's going to be a rook sack on f6. At least that's what the engine says. I don't know if Wesley So had this planned. I have a feeling he probably did. This rook is in a very aggressive location, and it can't be taken. If you take with the knight, then the knight is going to recapture. Check. The only way to get out of check is to take out the knight with the bishop, but after the bishop recaptures, what are you doing about queen h8, mate? You got nothing. You're busted. So, king to g8 is not working there, but there is another move. There is knight to h5. This is what Carlsen plays. And of course, he did not save his knight because the knight is pinned to the king, and so g4. And that knight will be won. Now what Carlsen needs to do here, according to the engine, is play f5, attacking the knight on e4. Now, if you were to take that pawn, well then how are you going to win this knight here? That's the pawn you need to use to win that knight, so you got to move the knight. So let's say you move the knight, d2, knight to f6. That was the whole point of this move, f5. You want the knight to get here to f6 with adequate defense. The rook cannot capture on f6, and the whole point is you want to be able to replace this knight with a knight when it's captured with the g-pawn. That's the best way for black to play. But of course, in a very difficult position like this, Carlsen, being only a human, is going to struggle to find these computer defenses. He played, instead of that, bishop takes c4, which is a mistake. Wesley So takes on h5, which on the surface looks like an elementary blunder. Can't this bishop just get out of danger with bishop d5, the move Carlsen played? Yes, and black is still a piece up. How is white getting the piece back? Well, we start with knight to f6 check. And that knight has to be captured. If you move the king, of course, h takes g6. Check is going to lead to mate. So knight takes f6. And now yet another stunning move from Wesley So. Not going for the obvious recapture, bishop takes f6. He plays rook takes f6, hitting the queen. And what would you play here if you had the black pieces? The fact that I'm even asking you is probably making you think that the obvious move, bishop takes f6, has something wrong with it. And if you think anything like Carlsen, what you might be worried about in this position is this move h takes g6 with check. The king takes on g6, but now we got queen to h6 check. The king is driven to f5, and here comes the rook. Rook to f1 check. King goes to e6. Then we get to grab the bishop on f6 with check. And then after the king moves, we're grabbing the queen. But after a takes b6, black does have the two rooks for the queen, and he's got the bishop, and this is apparently the best chance for black. But Carlsen, he didn't like that idea, and he opted for queen takes f6 here. He just gave up the queen this way. Bishop takes f6, and now he's really only got a rook and a bishop for the queen. He tries this move g5. I guess he wants to open up the file to the white king, but it's not going to really amount to anything. Wesley just takes on g5. He takes on f6, maybe expecting the queen to take, and then he'll deliver some desperate rook check, which isn't going to do anything anyway. But so he plays queen to f5 check first. He wants to do everything with check. So the king moves to g7. Guess what? Another check. King takes. Now I take the bishop with check. King goes to h7, and we just keep checking. Okay, we have a little back and forth. Of course, Wesley does not want a repetition, so he ends up moving the king. And then the rook does get to g8, but we got another check. And we put a rook here on g1, check the king so that we will force a trade of rooks here. Okay, now it's rook and bishop versus queen. Throws in a check, takes the pawn on b7. And at the end of the day, the queen is just too much for the rook and bishop to deal with. Running rampant, and So's technique is excellent. He ends up grabbing pawns, and then at the end of the day, these pawns get moving over here on the queen side, and they are not going to be stopped. And they just keep moving. And let's see how far we get. Right here is the point where Carlsen has finally had enough, and he resigns. Seeing that his bishop and rook are going to be no match for this pawn duo, which is going to continue to advance, and one of them will eventually become a queen. So, quite an incredible performance by Wesley So, giving Carlsen a taste of his own medicine, reminding him that he is but a mortal, and that even he is vulnerable to being dragged into a quagmire, where objectively he still may be the better side, but practically he's going to have to defend like a computer in order to survive after this incredible sacrificial attack by Wesley So, which he just couldn't deal with. So thanks for watching. Consider subscribing for more content like this coming soon, and I'll see you on the next video.